Hi everyone, let me first introduce myself. I am Werner Uys from the University of South Africa at the Department of Taxation. This presentation highlights factors affecting taxpayers' confidence in the Commissioner for the South African Revenue Service, or SARS. I will show you the SARS logo on the next slide. Tax administrations globally are evolving, and tax commissioners must understand these changes to improve tax governance. Until SARS, taxes were administered by the Department of Finance. Today, it is important for government and SARS to ensure they build trust with taxpayers to raise tax revenue. There is also a need to address problematic interactions between taxpayers and the tax authority. For example, tax compliance can be affected by how taxpayers are treated. From a social legal perspective, this study is also linked to the South African social situation where the law is concerned. The courts often adjudicate disputes between taxpayers and the Commissioner for SARS. For instance, it can involve a dispute about SARS's application of the tax laws or where a taxpayer's alleged non-compliance is disputed. Since the Commissioner takes decisions regarding tax matters, it is essential to understand his legal authority under several tax acts, the SARS Act and the Constitution of South Africa, 1996. Let us move over to the next slide. The SARS logo represents the South African Tax Authority. But you may ask why tax governance matters. If the laws are clear about taxpayers and their tax obligations, and why do the acts and decisions of the Commissioner affect trust in the tax authority? According to the Tax Act, the Commissioner is appointed for 5 years by the Minister of Finance. During this time, under Section 4 of the SARS Act, the Commissioner must ensure that SARS performs its revenue collection functions in the most cost-efficient and effective manner, and under the values and principles mentioned in the Constitution of South Africa. Therefore, sound tax governance should be the result of an effective and efficient tax administration. In contrast, poor tax governance can result in corruption, tax evasion, and unfair distributions of taxes. The economy can also become unstable, and social unrest may develop. The public's perception of how fair SARS is can be affected by how they observe the Commissioner's acts and decisions. Foremost, transparency in tax governance processes can promote trust between government and taxpayers. A central hypothesis of this research is that effective and efficient tax administration leads to economic growth and social welfare in South Africa. Let us talk about SARS's objectives and the Commissioner's mandate. SARS revenue allows for about 90% of South African government funding. SARS facilitates legitimate trade by connecting South Africa with the rest of the world. Governance at SARS manifests through its objectives and the Commissioner's responsibilities stated in the SARS Act. Some objectives include providing clarity and certainty for taxpayers and traders and their tax obligations, making it easy for taxpayers to pay taxes, detecting taxpayers and traders who do not comply with their obligations, and developing, and I quote this, a high-performing, diverse, agile, engaged, and evolved workforce. The Commissioner's responsibilities include SARS performing its functions and taking all decisions regarding SARS. He is ultimately the CEO and accounting officer who must control SARS staff and exercises discipline. Lastly, he takes responsibility for all income and expenditures of SARS. Interestingly, for the 2020-2021 period, SARS spent 0.72% of all income on revenue collection. The Commissioner's mandate can be summarized as follows: modernizing the tax systems, improving the tax ecosystem. As said earlier, transparency is essential, but also accountability, and building public confidence in the overall tax administration system. The last SARS objective imposes great responsibility on the Commissioner. To achieve revenue goals, he must ensure that SARS is well managed and that stakeholders' voices are heard. Other South African stakeholders than taxpayers and traders include Parliament, the Minister of Finance, the Auditor General, the courts, the Office of the Tax Ombudsman, and law enforcement agencies. Background and purpose. In Roman times, government officials did not collect taxes themselves. The task was left to the publicani, or outsourced tax farmers. As contractors, they brought money into the Roman Empire's revenue chest on behalf of the government. Today, tax officials serve this purpose. Government officials' titles assist in identifying their roles and responsibilities. When referring to the Commissioner, we have to also refer to the officials in service of SARS acting under the Commissioner's direction. They act on behalf of the Commissioner in their interactions with taxpayers and traders. Looking through the lenses of the judiciary helps us determine some of the key factors affecting confidence in the tax authority. Now, about the research problem. The following points emanate from the research problem. Firstly, the main research question is how taxpayer trust can be built through the Commissioner's acts and decisions. The secondary question is, how do the Commissioner and his officials exercise their discretionary powers? This can be observed through the lenses of the judiciary. Earlier, we spoke about effective and efficient tax administration and revenue collection. Key factors that contribute to the confidence in the Commissioner and accordingly are identified. Now for the next slide, the research methodology. To conduct rigorous academic research, researchers must probe the existing body of knowledge and integrate all outcomes and perspectives from several empirical findings. It helps to address the main and secondary research questions mentioned earlier. As Ngwenyama notes, the researcher must make the research process explicit. This study followed focal principles of the doctrinal research methodology, yet intersected with selected conventions of social legal research. In drawing on the strengths of the two traditions, the study suggests more robust conclusions about social science phenomena, yet mindful of the law framework. For example, how the Commissioner's acts and decisions can improve taxpayers' confidence in SARS. What have the courts said about the Commissioner's acts and decisions in the past? In Moyane versus Ramaphosa and others, the High Court noted that in the letter written by the President of the Republic of South Africa, it was stated that SARS's credibility depends on public trust in the Commissioner. This was the letter that the court reviewed from the President, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa. The High Court held that even a highly regarded agency like SARS could sink into a quagmire under the Commissioner's leadership. In ITC 1295, the tax court determined that the courts will only observe or intervene if the Commissioner misuses his discretion. It should be noted that the Commissioner is not a judicial officer, and the courts, if necessary, can be called upon to adjudicate tax disputes. As determined by the Constitutional Court in Arena Holdings Pty Limited, and they were trading as Financial Mails and others versus South African Revenue Services and others, that the Commissioner must uphold the values of the Constitution in all tax matters, including taxpayer confidentiality. What is critical to understand about elite officials like the Commissioner is that the constitutional duty bestowed upon them must be exercised impartially, without fear, favor, or prejudice. SARS must promote taxpayers as fundamental human rights, and an aggrieved taxpayer should be heard. In Nondabula versus Commissioner, SARS and another, the High Court held that as a public administrator, SARS must stick to its own legislation. It cannot deviate from that. And he must promote all the fundamental human rights and values advocated in the Constitution. SARS cannot be a judge in its own cause. So, SARS's consistent and trustworthy enforcement of the tax laws will build trust among taxpayers, traders, and the public. Findings. A key factor or risk associated with the Commissioner's position is his personal or political agendas. As stated in Moyane versus Ramaphosa, SARS can sink into obliviousness under the Commissioner's control. Ultimately, the Commissioner must govern SARS effectively, uphold the rule of law, and protect taxpayers' money. Every SARS decision appealed by taxpayers in court does not benefit the public purse. SARS cannot exhibit an overly formalistic approach when dealing with taxpayers who are experiencing extenuating circumstances, such as financial hardship. The Commissioner's leadership is crucial for SARS because officials are humans making decisions affecting other human beings. Thus, any personal or political agendas can undermine confidence. The next generation of commissioners must take note. They will be succession creators and information owners. Lastly, it is submitted that fair decision-making and trust go hand in hand, and this in turn ultimately enhance tax compliance. Acknowledgement. I want to thank Ishani Brown, Erica Jameson, and Mike Hamel for their help in organizing this special event. The Ontario International Development Agency's help made this fantastic opportunity possible. And that brings us to the end of this presentation. Thank you so much.